I was having y'all boy Rico from RicoScores, and as you can see, we are now here to break down why the Washington Commanders drafted tight end Ben Sinnott, 53rd overall. I've been hearing that his last name is pronounced Sinnott, not Sinnott, so I made sure to correct that. And of course, we got to talk about his comps. I have several comps for you, what I thought going into the draft before we got him, and now the comp that I have for him leaving the draft after I've taken some time to really sit down and watch a lot more tape on him. Because leading up to the draft, I made sure I watched tape on a lot of guys, especially at particular positions that we really needed, like tight end or receiver, offensive tackle, quarterback, and things like that. But now that we've drafted him, I know exactly which tight end we've taken. I'm watching extensive film on him. The only tight end I've watched more film on him in this draft class is Brock Bowers, because I'm a diehard Georgia Bulldog fan that has watched every game that Brock Bowers has ever played in. So now that I've watched all of that film, now that I've gone and found a whole bunch of stats and grades on him, it's time to break them down. And you notice in the title I said multi-threat tight end, not just dual threat. That was on purpose. We're going to dive into all that and more. Before we do, make sure you stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Make sure you stay tuned, because again, we're working our way up through the draft class. We're almost done though, because now we're on Ben Sinnott. After that is Mike Sanders still, and then it's Jazon Newton. Well, really Johnny Newton, but I'm just so used to calling him Johnny Newton at this point. But either way, we're on the way to being done with the rookie class. Already broke down the rest of the rookie class, already broke down a lot of the notable undrafted free agents, and at the very least had at least like a 5 to 10 minute breakdown for each undrafted free agent that we brought in. So make sure you go check those videos out if you haven't already. But of course, I will have my overall draft review and grade and all of that. It's probably going to be like an almost hour-long video breaking down the entire draft class and the value that we got everywhere and things like that, where everybody's going to fit, weaknesses, strengths, comps, who's ready to play day one, who may need to sit for a little while. And it may not even just be based on talent. It may just be based on the depth chart, because we already have great starters in front of them. You never know. So we're going to do like an overall breakdown and review of the whole draft. So make sure you stay tuned for that as well. I have a lot more fun ideas on the way, and I can't wait, because rookie mini camps at the end of this week. So let's go ahead and get to this video right now. Let's get it. Adam. And first of all, no matter where some draft analysts thought that Ben Sinnott should go in the draft, the Commanders clearly wanted him. Let's get that out the way, man. I don't care what everybody else is saying about him. The Commanders themselves wanted him, and that should already have you at the very least believing in him, at least giving Adam Peters and those guys the benefit of the doubt, even if you don't necessarily love Ben Sinnott. By the end of this video, I promise you're at the very least going to like him at least a little bit more than you already do, no matter how much you do or do not like him. But again, going back to the Commanders, they love him. I mean, you can tell from the comp that Adam Peters gives them. We'll get to that soon, really soon. But Jets put out a video from their like draft room during the draft and things like that, like they're behind the scenes, and basically they tried to trade up to our 53rd pick to get Malachi Corley, but we said no because we wanted Ben Sinnott. They traded down when Kool-Aid McKinstry and Cooper DeJean were on the board. I mean, they probably liked those guys, but not enough to not trade down. Whereas when it came to Ben Sinnott at 53rd overall, they refused to trade down then. And I'm not necessarily saying that they preferred Ben Sinnott over Kool-Aid McKinstry or Cooper DeJean, but I feel like that shows that there is some strong interest there from the Commanders. They clearly have big plans for that guy, because they probably could have gotten some really good value in return to trade back. And so you really never know. Maybe he would have still been there even after we traded back. But what we do know is that the Commanders like Ben Sinnott enough to not even take that chance and risk it. So they were like 53rd overall. Ben Sinnott is still here. We got to take him. We're not taking any chances. You like a guy, you take that guy. You ignore what everybody else's draft boards say. If you're that high on him, you take him. That's all that matters, man. And now, going to the comp, again, I try to like to give the comp at the very beginning of the video, near the beginning of the video, so that while we're going through everything, we're talking about his weaknesses, his strengths, we're going through his relative athletic score, how athletic he is, his stats and everything like that. I want you to have this comp in the back of your head. Now, this guy, I was fighting, and not only did I hear multiple comps, but I had my own comp coming in to the draft, and now I have a different comp leaving the draft. So when I watched this tape and tried to project him to be a normal dual threat tight end, I didn't really view him. I mean, of course he wears number 34, and of course in college he was utilized as a weird tight end. We're going to get to that soon, a very versatile tight end. But I was just thinking, Commanders, hey man, just get yourself a dual threat tight end. Get you a guy that can block and can contribute in the passing game. That's all I'm asking. So in that lens of a player, I was thinking when I was watching Ben Sinnott that, yeah, he could be the next Sam Laporta, basically a more athletic Sam Laporta. And I said that Friday morning before we even took him. You can go back and look at the receipts and everything. And then Thor Nystrom and Rick Spielman also agreed as well. I saw that after the draft that they agreed. But I've seen a lot of Commanders fans even comp him to our Chris Cooley. I like that comp. Chris Cooley makes a lot of sense, especially because Ben Sinnott plays the H-back. He's the inline tight end. He's all of those different type of things. And he wears number 34, which is a non-conventional number for a tight end, just like 47 is. So I felt like that comp was really good. And then my dog at the Burgundy Zone called him a young Zach Ertz. And really, no matter which of those comps you want to pick, basically at the end of the day, we got a great player. But most importantly, Adam Peters, along with some draft analysts like Daniel Jeremiah as well, have said that he's basically a healthy blend of the 49ers Kyle Juszczyk and 49ers George Kittle. Both are players that Adam Peters is very familiar with, of course. And after he said it, I'm not gonna lie, I'm switching my comp to that as well, man. And I'm not saying that he's going to be George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk. If you blend them together and you basically make a tight end Voltron, he's about to be the best of both of those guys. I'm not necessarily saying that, but I understand. Because not just simply because Adam Peters said it and that's it, but mostly because he was being utilized in that way in college. Again, I went in with the thought process, just give me a guy that can block and can catch and can occasionally get open if you need him to, maybe get some yak yardage. That's why I had Sam Laporta in my mind while watching his tape. But when you actually really watch his tape and see all of the ways that he was utilized as like an H-back, an inline tight end, a fullback, he was also even out wide sometimes like George Kittle. So you're seeing the Kyle Juszczyk fullback and those things in line, and then you're also seeing the George Kittle where he's like sometimes just a pure receiver some downs, literally out wide, closer to like a Terry McLaurin than he is to like the tackle, which is really crazy. So knowing how the Commanders potentially plan on using him, I think that comp is way more accurate than him. Way more accurate. Again, I think Sam Laporta makes a lot of sense if you only plan on using him as a normal and typical tight end. I think he can be that still, but since Adam Peters compared him to being a combination of Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle, then I literally see them using him just like that combination of those two guys. I see the vision, and now my comp is officially a healthy blend of George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk. Maybe like 70% Kyle Juszczyk, 30% George Kittle is probably the best way to put it. But either way, those are the two guys that you think of. And as far as this Kittle and Kyle combination goes, when you watch the tape, he's basically, if you're really trying to break it down, he's better at blocking in space than George Kittle, and he's a way deadlier pass catching option than Kyle Juszczyk ever was. So I don't know. I mean, just look at that relative athletic score right here, man. Look at this right here. First of all, most importantly, we're here to look at Ben Sinnott's 9.73. That's already like ridiculous, like isolated. Even ignoring George Kittle, that's phenomenal. Of course, on tape, he looks like a crazy athlete, but he still went to the combine and tested even better than I expected after watching his tape. So there's an even higher ceiling, a further surface to scratch than I even originally believed even watching his tape. You watch his tape and you're like, yeah, man, if an offense can finally utilize him more often and in a more creative ways, then yeah, he can become even better. But then the way he tested is absolutely ridiculous, man. Those numbers are ridiculous. And then of course you see George Kittle right there on the right side. He's a more athletic George Kittle. Now George Kittle is faster, but Ben Sinnott is basically better in almost every other way. More explosive. He's more agile and quick. I mean, if you really break it down, it just depends on what you're looking at. This guy is just a more athletic. At worst, he's the same athlete as George Kittle. If you want to go there, they're about the same height. And if anything, Ben Sinnott is 3 pounds heavier, and they're almost identical the whole rest of the way down, except for you can give George Kittle the lean on speed. You can give Ben Sinnott the lead on explosion. Basically the same. I wish we knew what Ben Sinnott would have benched, because I'm pretty sure it would have been really fantastic as well. And so basically, again, a more athletic George Kittle. And remember, Adam Peters is the guy that found George Kittle in the 5th round. So if anybody has an eye for tight ends, or at the very least knows when somebody looks like George Kittle, it's the guy that literally found George Kittle. So when he says that he thinks he found another George Kittle, what am I to argue against that? I mean, he's literally the guy that identified George Kittle and got him in the 5th round when everybody else thought he was probably undraftable. That some people were even surprised when the 49ers took George Kittle in the 5th round. A lot of people are like, who? What? 5th round? You probably could have got him as an undrafted free agent. So when you see Ben Sinnott going in the 2nd, and the fact that George Kittle went in the 5th, I don't necessarily think that automatically just is parallel to the fact that Ben Sinnott is 3 rounds better than George Kittle. But just give him the benefit of the doubt at the very least, just based on the fact that this is Adam Peters we're talking about. And then continuing with the whole athlete side of things, Ben Sinnott had the highest vertical, 40 inches, the longest broad jump, 10 foot 6 inches, and fastest 3-cone, 6.82, of any tight end at the entire combine in this entire draft class. And on top of that, he also had the 2nd best relative athletic score of a 9.72, only behind the super freak athlete, but also extremely raw Theo Johnson. Ben Sinnott is only slightly less athletic than him being like a generationally freakish athlete, and at the same time, he's light years more ready to play right now. His floor is way higher. Overall, if you had to give like a point system, you include how good they are now and what their potential is, and then combine those points. Ben Sinnott outpoints Theo Johnson easily. So I think honestly it was my Georgia Bulldog Brock Bowers and then Ben Sinnott, and then we can argue a tier below that everybody else. You could argue that. I mean, Jared Wiley is pretty straight. I liked him as well. But honestly, Ben Sinnott probably separates himself as the 2nd best tight end. We'll get there, because I'm not the only one saying that. We'll get there soon. Also, shouts out to David Gautieri, I believe, on Twitter, at Guru Fantasy World. He brought up a great point. Tight ends to post a 40-inch vertical at 250 plus pounds and get drafted within the first 3 rounds of NFL draft: Vernon Davis, Ben Sinnott. End of list. That's it. Literally. That's it. That's absolutely insane. That's very rare company. But at the same time, on top of already basically having Vernon Davis ceiling as a receiving threat, he also can block very well, which is something Vernon Davis never had, which is why he was never a dual threat tight end, which is why our offenses were a little stifled back during those Jordan Reed, Vernon Davis, Jeremy Sprinkle days. You need a dual threat guy. None of those guys were dual threats. I think Bennett Sinnott can be. We'll get there soon, though. I'm going to really break that down later on when we get to talking about how Jayden Daniels is going to benefit mightily from the drafting of Ben Sinnott. Now let's move on to talk about how do experts feel about Ben Sinnott. Well, first of all, like I alluded to a little bit earlier, Jordan Reed of ESPN, formerly with the Draft Network, this guy's whole thing is draft. That's his whole thing. He works for ESPN now, but his whole side of what he does for ESPN is basically kind of replacing Todd McShay, but he like really loves his film. This is what he does. He tweeted all the way back on April 26th, loyal scouting notebook readers were prepared for Sinnott to be drafted at tight end 2. NFL scouts have raved about him since January. So he quote tweeted his tweet all the way back from April 5th. He said, tight end 2 off the board behind Brock Bowers. Kansas State's Ben Sinnott is a name that's hot in draft circles. He said there are mixed predictions around the NFL on the 2nd tight end off the board behind Georgia's Brock Bowers. You know what I'm saying? It's Georgia. Come on. What do you expect, man? You know what I'm saying? Texas, Jatavion Sanders was seen as the most likely option exiting the 2023 season, and that is true. But that narrative has shifted during the draft process once more people actually sat down and really watched the tape. For one, scouts are enamored with Kansas State's Ben Sinnott. He has a lot of fans as a day 2 target. Scouts that I've spoke to have raved about his versatile skill set as a pass catcher and blocker, and many believe he simply offers more than Sanders. He does, though. Sanders is a pretty nice receiving tight end, but at the same time, Ben Sinnott has a higher ceiling because he's he's more athletic, and he's a way better blocker than Ja'Vion Sanders will probably ever be. So I'm really happy as far as that goes. It helps that Sinnott put on a show at the combine. He had the highest vertical, longest broad jump, and fastest three cone of all tight ends. Don't be surprised to see Sinnott as the second tight end off the board and inside somewhere within the top 75 picks. So scouts are already prepared for this. They're not surprised. Some draft analysts were surprised and saying that maybe it was a reach or something. Again, I'm completely ignoring that noise. But the scouts, the real football guys that really do this, people in NFL circles, GMs and things like that, were not surprised to see Ben Sinnott to be the second tight end off the board. Dane Brugler himself said, quote, Sinnott offers some blocking value, but his controlled athleticism and reliable pass catching traits project him best as a versatile H-back who can be flexed across the formation. All 32 NFL teams will appreciate his football IQ and pro-ready toughness. We're going to get to that toughness later as well. Although he won't be an ideal fit for every scheme. Moving on, you have CBS Sports. When they did the individual grades and breakdowns for every pick out of the entire draft from every team, they gave us an A+ for taking Ben Sinnott 53rd overall. They said, love this pick. Athletic, explosive athlete. Clearly the second best receiving tight end in the class. Second best receiving tight end, y'all. Receiving. And he's arguably probably the best blocking tight end, at least out of the top tight ends available. Yak's skill is outstanding. Strong hands, just not a true burner down the seam, will be a go-to target for Jayden Daniels. I'm telling you, A+ right there. Then you have at the OG Fantasy. He said not enough steam with Ben Sinnott in rookie drafts or ranks. And they're talking about as far as like now we're starting to get into the fantasy football drafts. And he's basically saying like people are sleeping right now. Big time draft winner, athletic plus draft capital, can make plays downfield, great fit with Daniels, landed perfectly, the next Chris Cooley, Jordan Reed, Washington fantasy friendly tight end. So he's basically saying, hey, if you sleep, wake up. This is a guy that you can depend on to be a strong contributor in fantasy football drafts because he's going to be such a reliable and consistent target, not only for Jayden Daniels, but this overall Washington Commanders offense. And again, he compared his fantasy value to that of Chris Cooley and Jordan Reed. That's very high praise right there. As far as like usage rate, always being involved no matter what. Somebody that you can depend on week in, week out, at least getting some type of production. Because as much as I love Terry McLaurin, a lot of times defensive coordinators are going to do their best to try to scheme him out. So he may go one game, 6 catches, 100 yards, a touchdown or 2. Then another game, 2 catches for 20 yards. You know, when it comes to fantasy football, you know, Terry McLaurin up to this point of his career, I hope Cliff Kingsbury changes this, but up to this point in his career, it's not like Justin Jefferson where you're assuming he's at least getting 10 targets a game. It hasn't been like that. Ben Sinnott is a guy that you can maybe out of anybody on this entire offense depend on getting a certain amount of targets every game. And then Ian Cummings felt like getting Ben Sinnott completed our A+ day 2. He said on Twitter immediately after we drafted Ben Sinnott, and then they got Ben Sinnott. Commanders draft so far on day 2, A++. And that was after we got Mike Sanderstill, we got Johnny Newton, and then we got Ben Sinnott. Not in that order, of course, but you know, those are the 3 guys that made Ian Cummings go like, oh my Lord, these Commanders A++. And now let's talk about stats. If you don't like what these draft analysts and scouts and NFL football people, the experts are saying about them, let's dive into some stats. Maybe you're not convinced yet. Well, first of all, Ben Sinnott left Kansas State tied for the most receiving touchdowns amongst all tight ends with 10, 3rd in receptions with 82, and 4th in receiving yards with 1,138. And again, this is a guy that can block very well as well on top of these receiving stats. Also, Ben Sinnott forced 14 missed tackles, 4th amongst tight ends coming into this draft on 48 receptions. 14 missed tackles on 48 receptions. Was also in the 90th percentile in yards per route ran and 89th percentile in receiving grade versus single coverage. You can't single cover him. He's a deadly weapon. He's gonna break tackles after he gets the ball, after you can't cover him. And again, I want to keep emphasizing all of these receiving stats and information and grades I'm giving you. He can also block very well. And so now you know he's really good after the catch as well. He can break tackles. And how about in the red zone? Like, you can argue that's probably where he'll be needed the most as far as like an immediate upgrade over what we currently have. Because in the tight end room right now, we have guys that can block, and John Bates and Zach Ertz. We have guys that can catch, and Zach Ertz and I hope my boy Armani Rogers will see how healthy he is with his freakish athleticism, high ceiling, and things like that. Cole Turner. But as far as being like a dependable, we know when in doubt, this guy's is gonna be money in the red zone. That's probably the one specific thing that we needed the most in this tight end group right now. I like Cole Turner and Armani Rogers' potential, but there's still so many question marks and red flags we'll have to see. Ben Sinnott is a guy that you can trust can come in and contribute immediately right there, because in the red zone, he had an 87 Pro Football Focus grade. That's first amongst all tight ends. He had 9 receptions and 6 touchdowns. He is money in the red zone. Also, he was 4th in the NCAA in targets with 73, 4th in yards per route ran 2.02, 5th in average depth of target at 10.1, so he's a pretty deep receiving threat as well. 3rd in touchdowns with 6, and 3rd highest Pro Football Focus grade overall with an 82. Come on, dog. And then at Perfect Takes on Twitter did a great breakdown. You can see it on your screen right now. And this is coming from Jacob LeQuire. And basically, just look at the success percentage. He is 2nd out of all tight ends, only behind Jaheim Bell. But at the same time, his relative athletic score is the highest by far that you see on the screen. Ben Sinnott's the most athletic. Basically, my point is, especially looking at the relative athletic score side of this, is that he's the biggest freak athlete that's actually playable and productive. Theo Johnson, the most athletic relative athletic score out of all tight ends, but he's not even really playable right now. Like he's so raw that all of that athleticism basically doesn't matter. Out of all of the tight ends that can actually go and contribute to a team, at least within their rookie season, Ben Sinnott has the highest ceiling, you could argue. It's between him and my dog, Brock Bowers, to be completely honest with you. Just looking at the relative athletic scores. And then after all of those high ceiling passing traits and stats, again, I want to emphasize he's a good blocker with room to grow. He can become a better blocker with better technique. If you look at his tape, right now he's relying mostly on just pure strength and things like that. Once he actually gets like technique down and learns how to become a more nuanced blocker, it may be raps for people right now. Right now, he's our only true dual threat tight end projection. And that's huge for a young quarterback on so many levels. Let me break this down for you. Zach Ertz can block very well and can be a dependable getting open target type of guy, but offers no yak yardage at all. John Bates is arguably the best blocking tight end in all of football, but doesn't offer you much in the passing game at all. And then even as much as I love Armani Rogers and think that he has a Darren Waller ceiling, he's still a huge question mark, and I'm not even sure about his blocking potential at all, even on his best day. And then I love Cole Turner as a great contested catch guy, but he can't separate, and his blocking is still a question mark as well. So I can see as soon as his rookie season, Ben Sinnott being a better blocker than Armani Rogers and Cole Turner, and being a far better passing threat than Zach Ertz and John Bates. So how do you keep that off the field? Honestly, Jayden is going to fall in love with him very quickly. And that's not all. Cliff Kingsbury is going to love him as well. I mean, let me put it like this. Remember we had, and I briefly mentioned this earlier, I alluded to this earlier, a little bit of foreshadowing. We had the receiving tight ends of Jordan Reed and Vernon Davis at the same time. We were all so excited, so electric. And then we were trying to figure out why our offense was so anemic, why it was so inconsistent, why it was still so predictable and defenses knew what we were doing. Well, when Reed or Vernon Davis were on the field, teams knew we were far more likely to throw the ball. And then when Jeremy Butterfingers Sprinkle was on the field, teams knew we were far more likely to run the ball. So just by having a certain tight end on the field, teams knew what we were doing before we even snapped the ball most of the time, which pretty much made it almost impossible to be a consistent and effective offense. I mean, you can kind of feel sorry for Jay Gruden in a way for that. So Cliff will not have that problem now that he has Ben Sinnott on his team, and Jayden Daniels will be able to snap the ball against balanced defenses more times than not and be able to attack them effectively, choose the right route, because again, just by a certain tight end being on the field, it doesn't automatically forecast what we plan on doing. Because, hey, say you did want to switch it up. Say, hey, Vernon Davis, Jordan Reed on the field, we're going to run the ball. That running play is pretty much cooked. You better not run it their side. And then Jeremy Sprinkle, hey, let's switch it up. People think we're going to run it with you. Let's throw you the ball. You're wide open, right? Because teams are expecting run. Then you drop it for no reason. Now it's 2nd and 10. We just wasted a whole down. So that's why Ben Sinnott will be so valuable to this team, man. Y'all really don't understand how effective and how unfair it is to have a dual threat tight end. You notice that pretty much almost all of the NFL teams that made it further into the playoffs all had really good tight ends, at least dual threat tight ends that you could depend on. All of them. I think like the AFC and NFC championship, all 4 teams had really good top tight ends, arguably the top 4 tight ends in the game, at least 4 of the top 6. That's not a coincidence at all, man. It's so hard to defend an offense with a dual threat tight end for the reasons I've already explained. And I don't know if y'all have seen it yet, But there was this one play in goal line against Texas Tech where he pancakes the edge rusher, and then it really had him on his back looking like roadkill afterwards. And then he took a DB by the chest and almost escorted him all the way back to the locker room. And as a result, the quarterback was able to run for a touchdown untouched to the outside of the tackle. I mean, it's ridiculous. I mean, let me remind you, he pancaked the edge rusher, and that's probably my favorite play that I've ever watched out of any play on this tape. All of the receiving stuff, great. The tight ends, the contested catches, getting open, running people over as a runner after getting yak yardage and things like that. All of that is exciting and great. But that play against, who was it, against Texas Tech, where he literally ran over the edge rusher and then took the DB out the play. Quarterback easily runs in for a touchdown untouched. Now imagine if that's Jayden Daniels doing that, running behind a guy like that on the outside. It's unfair. And as a defense, if you got to worry about a guy that's capable of doing that, now you're going to overcompensate for that potential running to the outside with Ben Sinnott leading it for Jayden Daniels. Now everything else is going to be open and easier for you if you don't do that. And also, Kansas State put up 30 red zone rushing touchdowns last year. Ben Sinnott played a huge role in that. A big time role in that, again, just for that one play example, but many more on tape. Is not just that one. And I know I already briefly talked about this, but his hands are great. When you watch his highlights, a lot of his best catches are when there's somebody all over him already, like literally giving Ben Sinnott their best shot while he's trying to catch the ball, like literally like tackling him, not even just trying to bat the ball down. Sometimes it even looks like pass interference. They're already all over his shoulders and his arms, but sometimes it's like they're literally like, well, I can't do anything about him catching it with my hands. I'm gonna try to hit him as hard as I can to make the ball pop out, and he still finds a way to end up coming down with it. And then a lot of the times when those DBs do that, they look like they took more damage and more punishment than he did. He just gracefully falls down to the ground with the ball in his hand, and then the DB looks like they pretty much just ran into a brick wall. It's crazy. And also, to go back to Jayden Daniels real quick, Ben Sinnott said that he and Jayden Daniels have already trained in California together before leading up to the draft. So maybe that chemistry is going to build up way sooner than expected. Watch out for that. He said, quote, "I'm pumped. He's a hell of an athlete, great player, and great guy." He was basically talking about in his presser after the draft that him and Jayden Daniels have already like thrown the ball to each other and things like that. So we may already have a slight step ahead in building that chemistry right there. Maybe Jayden Daniels' favorite target to go into training camp with. You never know. Because, I mean, I know Terry McLaurin has been on the Commanders for years. I know Jahan Dotson has been here for a couple of years, all of these guys. But technically, the only person that's ever caught a pass from Jayden Daniels so far on this entire team is probably Ben Sinnott from the time that they were working out together leading up to the draft. That's literally it. So he may go into like training camp and mandatory mini camp and things like that with more chemistry with Ben Sinnott than anybody else. It's quite likely. Again, Terry McLaurin has been on the Commanders for forever, but he hasn't been catching passes from Jayden Daniels specifically for forever. Nobody has that we have on this roster, but Ben Sinnott has a slight lead over everybody right now with their work over the offseason. Also, moving on and keeping it with Jayden Daniels one more time real quick, I want y'all to at least look at it like Jayden Daniels was that productive in college, and Ben Sinnott is easily way better, in my opinion, than the LSU tight end that they had last year, the Mason Taylor kid. So if you could just imagine what Jayden Daniels would do with, I mean, I guess you could argue like Malik Neighbors is an elite receiver. You're hoping that can kind of be comp to Terry McLaurin. You're hoping Jahan Dotson can give you similar value to what Brian Thompson did for him at Thomas did for him at LSU. And I know for a fact Ben Sinnott is better than Mason Taylor. So I'm thinking Jayden Daniels, a lot of people like concerns when they had with Jayden Daniels is what is he going to do at the NFL level when he doesn't have the same elite weapons that he had at LSU. I'm hoping that if anything, the weapons that he has at the NFL level, what we've given them already here to for the Commanders to start with, are arguably overall better than what he had at LSU. More well-rounded unit of weapons, not just the Malik Neighbors and Brian Thomas show. That's it. I feel like we have a more well-rounded group, and I love Malik Neighbors' talent, but he's got to go out there to the NFL level and prove he can be as good as Terry McLaurin. He's not better than Terry McLaurin day one just simply because he got drafted. You got to show me. So I love the weapons that Jayden Daniels is stepping in with, and Ben Sinnott is one of the biggest reasons. Now, going back to the importance of a dual threat tight end, remember, when Eugene Shin, who's our lead analytics guy with the title of Senior VP of Football Strategy and things like that, he talked about a while ago, months ago, how important having a dual threat tight end is to a consistent, long-term, successful NFL team, especially offensively specifically. So I'm very sure when you think about it, just based off of how high Adam Peters was on him when we talked about that briefly earlier, and then Eugene Shin, the guy that strictly believes that tight ends are way underrated when it comes to the draft process, I'm pretty sure Eugene Shin was one of those guys vouching for the Commanders to take Sinnott as soon as possible as well. So I'm thinking that if you really think about it, our lead football guy and Adam Peters, our lead analytics guy and Eugene Shin, both coming together to absolutely love this pick and make it happen. I'm telling you, this team is very much so behind Ben Sinnott, and I think he's going to go out. If I had to basically put my money on which rookie that we drafted is going to come in and have the most immediate impact outside of Jayden Daniels. Now, granted, being an offensive player helps a lot versus being a defensive player, but I think Ben Sinnott is probably my bet as far as like who's going to week one going out the gate, going out there and putting up some pretty good numbers and looking like a steal in the draft. But we'll see. But the really fun part is he's more than even just a dual threat. That's the crazy part. He's really like a triple, quadruple threat. Let's break it down. To me, his versatility is easily the best part about him. Yeah, I do love his high upside. I love his hands. I love all of that type of stuff. But I feel like his versatility is the best part about him. I mean, because if you do want to compare him to Chris Cooley, which is a great way to think about how the Commanders will use him, I feel like that's a really good comp for him, then basically he's a more athletic Chris Cooley. Look on your screen right now. Look at this. We already compared him to George Kittle. He was slightly more athletic than him. He's easily big gap more athletic than Chris Cooley. And again, I see him being utilized very closely to how Chris Cooley was used here. There's not a lot of guys like that. As Kyle Juszczyk, as Chris Cooley, it's a very short list of guys that are even like that within the last 20, 30 years. And I feel like Chris Cooley is probably the most accurate comp because Kyle Juszczyk, again, Ben Sinnott is a way better passing threat. George Kittle-wise, I prefer Ben Sinnott to be my fullback. I'm not saying that he's going to automatically go out there and be better than George Kittle, but he is coming to the NFL projected to be better than George Kittle at certain things, especially being a more versatile piece that can literally line up at fullback for you. So when you're trying to like, okay, stop giving me two separate names and trying to combine them, give me one guy that he literally looks like he'll be utilized as at the NFL level. Chris Cooley is your most accurate comp, but the thing is, he's just way more athletic than Chris Cooley. So even that comp is a little difficult to think about. I mean, just remember how great and fun Chris Cooley was for us back then, and then add more athleticism and a higher ceiling and a GM that has experience being around and working with both Kyle Juszczyk and George Kittle. So if anybody knows the best way to utilize the guy, is going to be him. And then the fact that he wears number 34 tells you everything you need to know. Just a very unconventional number, just like Chris Cooley. But moving on, going back to his versatility and why it's my favorite part about him, just picture it. On, say, first down, he's the inline tight end right next to the tackle, and is basically like an extra blocker on that side for us to run the ball. Then on second down, he's the fullback in front of Brian Robinson to help pave the way for him to get extra yards past the linebackers. He's just over there. Whatever guy thinks he's coming to tackle Brian Robinson, you're about to get ran over by Ben Sinnott. Now that's one less guy Brian Robinson has to deal with where he's running. And then on third down, he's out wide closer to Terry McLaurin than the offensive line. And then now he's faster than the linebackers that you can ask to go cover him, and he's bigger than the defensive backs. And now he's out there running a slant and catches it for a first down. What can you do as a defensive coordinator? This guy's superpower is that he will dictate matchups, because even if Ben Sinnott is on the field as an inline blocker, like on that first down scenario that I gave you in that 3-down scenario, you still need to have an extra DB on the field just in case to cover Sinnott if he leaks out for a route. Say he just blocks for a little bit and then leaks out underneath. You have to have a DB out there because I don't trust many linebackers to stick with him. But since he's an inline tight end on the play, which shows run, a defense would typically want to have another big linebacker on the field to help against that run. But if you do that, Jayden Daniels can audible to a pass play that sends Sinnott out there against that running linebacker, that run-stopping linebacker in coverage, and then that's a win for Sinnott right there. He's going to be open. But if they do bring in that extra DB instead of having that run-stopping linebacker, then they can just run right at that DB with the running play that they originally had with him as the inline tight end. The defense is always going to be wrong when there's a guy like Ben Ben Sinnott out there. It's really just up to Cliff Kingsbury to be smart enough and creative enough and consistent enough to be able to utilize these guys in the right way, because that's going to make Ben Sinnott scary. Like, as a defense, what do you honestly do? He's going to dictate matchups. On top of the fact that he already has great hands, on top of the fact that he's a really good yak guy and crazy difficult to tackle, on top of the fact that he's already a deadly and consistent red zone threat, very trustworthy, throw it up there, he's going to come down with it. Now you also have to worry about where he's going to be any given snap and how he's going to be utilized every single snap that he's on the field. It's scary. And then you already have all of these other weapons on the team, led by Terry McLaurin, and with how you already have to worry about Jayden Daniels and his dual threat ability, now you also have to worry about our offensive chess piece, our offensive Swiss Army knife right here in Ben Sinnott. Even with as much as I love Terry McLaurin, it doesn't require as much time to game plan against him as it does a versatile multi-threat tight end, because it's just like, what do you do any given snap? Where is he? You're gonna see the linebackers looking over to the sideline like, hey, Ben Sinnott's right there, what do we do? What you trying to do right now? Ben Sinnott's on the field, this is where he's at. How are we trying to adjust? Are we bringing in an extra DB? Are we bringing in an extra linebacker? What's the plan? That's how much of a problem Ben Sinnott's gonna be, especially once he's ready to actually step on in the field. Now, I'm not saying he's gonna be out there and be every defense's biggest headache immediately, like day one, week one, but I for sure believe he will be one day, and maybe even sooner rather than later, especially with how smart he is, because you got to be very smart to play like 3-4 different positions on an NFL team. It's already hard enough nuance wise, IQ wise, awareness, knowing where you need to be when you need to be there, even just learning the playbook wise at one position, let alone 3 or 4. So with that, I'm not really seeing why a lot of draft people are saying that he should have gone later in the draft. Maybe we could have waited until like a round or two later. But hey, man, when he's out there balling out for us, we will never question what pick we got him at, ever. Like, he goes out there and becomes a more athletic Chris Cooley or a healthy blend of Kyle Juszczyk or George Kittle, nobody will ever bring up how we may have been able to get him in the 3rd round or something like that. I do not care. Plus, I refuse to believe anybody is questioning the guy that literally found George Kittle in the 5th round. Forget all of the other all pros and pro bowlers that Adam Peters has found in multiple rounds of the draft, 5th round, 6th round, 7th round, all of that. But just tight end specifically, let's just stay there. I think it's easy to say that Adam Peters, if anybody, has a great eye for tight ends. So let him cook, man. I'm telling you. And a Kansas State reporter also had a great breakdown on him, and I agree with a lot of his points. I'm just gonna read like a quick small part of his really long, extensive breakdown. He said, skill set wise, versatility is the name of the game for Sinnott. When Kansas State went to their up-tempo offense, he might line up at 3 different positions: fullback, tight end, wide receiver on the same drive. Defenses, headaches, don't know what to do, don't know what to cover, don't know what to expect. Receiving is his best NFL skill. His hands, in particular, impressed me over the last 2 seasons. Will Howard threw multiple touchdown passes to him that I thought were either going to be picked or knocked away. He will stay with the catch until the end and take whatever punishment necessary to bring down the ball, like I talked about earlier. When he gets moving in the open field, it often requires 2 or 3 defensive backs to drag, kick, and fight for every inch to the turf. He's also deadly on the goal line in a short yardage situation as a fullback in play action. I mean, hey, I would just, me personally, just give him the ball in goal line situations sometimes. Just line up in I formation, and instead of giving it to Brian Robinson behind him, just quickly give it to him real quick. Defense not prepared. They're looking for Brian. Where's Brian Robinson? Where's Jayden Daniels with his legs? Oh, wait. Oh, no. This guy's bulldozing my linebacker. Ben Sinnott is bulldozing our Mike linebacker to make it into the end zone. And then continuing on with the article, at the same time, there are plenty of good receiving tight ends in this era of football. What separates him from tight ends that play more jumbo wide receivers is his ability and willingness to block. He may not be the best blocking fullback to play the game, but he's at least serviceable, if not at least above average. Roster space is at a premium in the NFL, and Ben is able to fill multiple roles in the offense. Receiving may be his best skill set, but his ability to do everything else, at least competently, separates him from more one-dimensional tight ends, and we're talking about at the NFL level as well. He played in a run-heavy Kansas State offense that featured pulling guards, tackles, centers, and tight ends. He led the way for both Deuce Vaughn and DJ Giddens, a name to remember for next year, on multiple touchdowns runs, both as an inline blocker and out of the backfield. The Wildcats love to run quarterback power on the goal line, with Sinnott leading the way for Will Howard. So again, I'm telling y'all, if you go look at Will Howard's red zone touchdown runs, goal line touchdown runs, it's Ben Sinnott in front, just absolutely punishing the guys in front of him. And I'm talking about edge rushers too. I'm not just talking about linebackers. I'm not just talking about DBs. We're talking about big edge rushers that weigh more than him. And also, is this the highest we've drafted a tight end in a long time? It sure feels like it. When was the last time we drafted a tight end in the second round or higher? Like, I really honestly don't know. And if his comp to being a younger Zach Ertz is true, let's just double back to that real quick, which sounds very possible with his red zone and break and tackle ability. It sounds very Zach Ertz-ish. Nobody knows better than us Commanders fans seeing that in person, him running over our linebackers, outrunning them, and then even running them over after the catch. But if that's a really accurate comp, which again, I think he's closer to Chris Cooley, Kyle Juszczyk, and things like that, but say he is Zach Ertz, then what better situation to land in as a Ben Sinnott than on the team with Zach Ertz himself on it, to give you every little piece of advice possible to literally become the next him. Zach Ertz is going to be like, yeah, man, let me put you on game. Let me take you under my wing. This is how you literally become what I was in my prime right here. And I love this meme that I saw on Twitter right here. Shouts out my boy Josh Taylor for posting this, because he said, with this picture, Ben Sinnott behind Zach Ertz, Jared Wiley behind Travis Kelce. I think that's very underrated. Theo Johnson behind Darren Waller. Even though I'm not, is Darren Waller still in the NFL? But either way, the future of tight ends are in good hands right now. I love that meme right there. But again, double back. I still like the Kyle Juszczyk with some George Kittle blended in way better as a comp, like way more accurate, not just because of the ceiling and potential, because that just sounds amazing. George Kittle, Kyle Juszczyk, come on now, but also again, play style wise and how the Commanders will more than likely use him out wide, big slot, fullback, next to Jayden Daniels in shotgun. Sometimes he was, instead of a running back there in shotgun, it would be Ben Sinnott sometimes. He was literally everywhere possible. And again, that also speaks volumes to how smart he is with the fact that he can play that many positions that well. It's not just a physical thing, it's more so mental when you're that versatile. And the fact that he could go from being a 0-star recruit that played just about every sport in existence to playing like 5 different positions in football at the college level at a very high level, that is crazy, man. That shows his work ethic at the very least, if anything. And I also love how rare a guy like him is. First of all, because again, like we already talked about earlier, defensive coordinators, especially outside of the NFC East, where opponents don't play us twice a year, will not be able to really simulate a guy like him in practice. So when preparing to go up against us throughout the week leading up to Sunday in our games, they're not going to really be ready. He's usually going to catch defenses off guard no matter how much work they put in. A week is not enough time to prepare for a guy like that when you don't already have a guy like that on your roster. And then secondly, for very selfish reasons, I love the thought of having something very few other NFL teams have. I take proud of that. I'm very proud of the fact that we have that. I take huge pride in that. The fact that we have a weapon that arguably nobody else in the NFL may eventually have. I mean, it's really a dying breed. It's very rare. Kyle Juszczyk was probably the last of them, and now you got Ben Sinnott next up. And Adam Peters is very excited about him. He said in an interview with the Commanders official media team, quote, he can do a lot of different things. This is literally just from 5 days ago, well after the draft. He has that versatility as a blocker, and then as a receiver, he can do everything you want to. I think the sky's the limit for him, unquote. And again, when the guy that found George Kittle in the 5th round says that about another tight end, you may want to take notice. And I never knew this until very recently, but did you know that Adam Peters was a college tight end before eventually transitioning to defensive lineman? I remember hearing about him being a defensive lineman, I guess, but I mean, college tight end, so maybe that's where that comes from. Maybe he wanted to be a tight end more, but then just from his body type, maybe lack of athleticism, maybe it just led to him becoming a defensive end. So I just thought that was really interesting that this is a guy that's a tight end at heart, and with his experience with working with Kyle Juszczyk and finding George Kittle, I have the utmost optimism in what he's found in Ben Sinnott. And another thing that may make you like him just a little bit more, Ben Sinnott led his high school hockey team in penalty minutes. Like, come on, dog. That's the guy that you've just drafted. That's the guy with the extreme toughness. I mean, just super mean streak, aggressive. That guy is a dog. Led his high school hockey team in penalty minutes. Come on, man. And then even on top of that, if that's not enough, Chris Cooley also said on the Kevin Sheehan podcast that Joe Gibbs would have loved this player. Like, that's just straight up. Chris Cooley thinks that this would have been a Joe Gibbs guy. So even if the previous like 40 something minutes of content that I just given you breaking down why you should love Ben Sinnott, I feel like at the very least I should win over the rest of y'all with that. Who knows though? But yeah, man, that's the end of this video. Please get in the comment section. Let me know how you feel about everything discussed in the video. Please stiff arm that like button, stiff arm the subscription button, and stiff arm the bell next to that subscription button so you get notification each and every time I release an informative and opinionated video just like this one. Again, stay tuned because I'm working on the rest of the draft class, which is just literally Mike Sanford still and Johnny Newton at this point. I'm super excited, so make sure y'all stay tuned for those last two. Then I'm gonna do a big time draft review and grade and all of that type of stuff. That video is probably gonna be like 40 minutes to an hour because I gotta break down everybody. Now we gotta look at it in the lens of what did we do as a whole in a draft class, and I may even throw in some undrafted free agents as well because I think they deserve to be a part of this draft class when we talk about them, especially some of the notable guys. So stay tuned for that. I have a lot more video ideas as well. We got to start taking a look at what this schedule may be because schedules are going to be released not too far away from now. We don't have like a definitive date yet, but we know it's in range. I may do like a schedule and record prediction right now, so stay tuned for like really fun creative videos like that. I have a lot more loaded in the chamber for stuff like that, like some predictive projection things like depth chart, all of that type of stuff. So stay tuned. And also, of course, let me know in the comment section how you feel about this video. How do you feel about Ben Sinnott as a pick? Do you agree or disagree with any of my points? Do you feel like there was a better tight end available? Do you feel like we should have waited to try to get him later in the draft? Or are you happy with the fact that we got him in the second round and didn't even chance letting another team get him? And the fact that we turned down trading back with the Jets when they wanted to trade up to get Malachi Corley. Let me know how you feel about everything. His weaknesses, his strengths, his comps, his relative athletic score, his ceiling, his floor, all of that type of stuff. How compatible and how helpful he'll be to a guy like Jayden Daniels. Let me know all of that in the comment section. Of course, I'm gonna try my best to read and reply to as many comments as possible. I really appreciate y'all. I'm gonna catch y'all later with a video. I'm out.